Miss Eleanor Whitmore. My name is Thomas O'Reilly. I'm 26. I work at Harland & Wolff in Belfast, mostly inside that new big liner everyone's been talking about for months now. They've named her Titanic, but I'm not writing about the ship. 3 days ago, one of our men came back from Southampton. He brought an old copy of Ivanhoe, bought it for a few pence at some second-hand shop. He didn't care for it, so yesterday at dinner he tossed it over to me and said, "Tommy, you're the only fool here who reads by choice." On page 123, I found a slip of paper. It said, "If this book ever finds a stranger, write to me and tell me who you have become by the day it reaches your hands. I like to think that things sometimes find people better than people find each other." And underneath was your name and an address in Boston. I thought about it for a long while, whether I had any right to write. Then I figured a person who leaves her address inside a book must at least half hope that someday someone will be foolish enough to use it. So here I am. Who have I become by the day I found your note? A man who walks every day into the belly of the biggest ship he's ever seen. You probably read about her launch a few weeks ago. Thousands of people down by the river, factory whistles blowing, children shouting, grown men taking off their hats like a king was passing by. And I stood there looking at her and thinking the most foolish thing. We're building a ship that'll carry thousands of people across the Atlantic, and I've never been farther than 40 miles from Belfast. Life has a strange sense of humor sometimes.
Now it's your turn, Miss Whitmore. Who have you become? And what I'm more curious about, why would a young woman from Boston leave her address in a book that somehow crosses an ocean and ends up with a man building the very ship that's meant to sail back toward you one day? Perhaps it's just coincidence, but I've worked with metal long enough to know that even the biggest things are held together by very small connections. Maybe this is one of them. Yours sincerely,
Mr. O'Reilly, your letter came yesterday morning. I read it twice. The first time to understand who you were, the second to figure out how, for God's sake, my note ended up in Belfast. I suppose I owe you an explanation now. Last autumn, I gave a few old books to a woman who was collecting them for resale. Ivanhoe was among them. I'd completely forgotten about that slip of paper. I left it there nearly 2 years ago. I was 21 then, and I had this strange habit of writing things I didn't dare say out loud. That day, I'd had an argument with my father. He said a person ought to know their place in the world. I said that if everyone knew their place, no one would ever have crossed an ocean. He didn't speak to me until dinner, and I went to my room, wrote that note, and put it in the book. Not because I wanted to meet a stranger, I just wanted to test one foolish thought, whether something written in a small room in Boston could one day end up so far away that I could no longer imagine the person who'd read it. Now I can. Your name is Thomas. You're 26, you work inside a ship in Belfast, and apparently you read books during dinner while the other men laugh at you. That's already more than I expected to learn. You asked who I've become. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 23. I live with my father, mother, and younger sister in the north of Boston. My father trades in fabrics. My mother thinks I ought to be married before I turn 25, because after that, she says, women start thinking too much. I haven't told her that I think it's already too late. I work a few days a week at a small bookshop. My father doesn't like it. He says we don't need the money. He doesn't understand that I don't work for the money. I like watching what books people buy when they think no one's looking. Men in expensive suits buy adventure. Lonely women buy novels. Old men buy travel books, as if they're all coming for a life they're just a little short of in their own. You wrote about the ship. I've heard about it. My father even brought home a newspaper with a drawing after the launch. He said ships like that prove the world is getting smaller. I thought the opposite. If we need a ship that big to cross the ocean, then the ocean is still plenty large enough. By the way, you wrote that you've never been more than 40 miles from Belfast. That surprised me. You're working on a ship that will carry people to places you've never seen yourself. Doesn't that seem unfair to you? I'd probably be furious, though maybe that's why I don't build ships. You asked why my note found its way to you. I don't know, but if it's already crossed the Atlantic, it would be impolite to let its journey end after one letter. So I'm writing back, and I have one question for you. When you stand inside that enormous ship, still empty, without passengers, without luggage, without music, and without voices, do you ever think about the people who will one day be there, or is it still just steel to you?
Miss Whitmore, your letter caught me on a bad day. Not a tragic one, not the kind you tell your grandchildren about later. Just one of those days when everything goes a little wrong, and by evening you start to think it's somehow your fault that the world was designed inconveniently. In the morning, the foreman sent back part of our work and made us do it over. After dinner, I cut my palm on the edge of a metal sheet, and just before the end of the shift, one of the lads knocked my cup of tea all over my jacket. So when I came home and saw an envelope from Boston on the table, I first thought it was some kind of mistake. I'm still not used to the idea that somewhere across the ocean there's a person who knows my name. Now to your question. No. For me, it hasn't been just steel for a long time. Today, I deliberately stayed behind after my shift. When the workers leave, the ship becomes something else entirely. During the day, there's such a racket that sometimes you can't hear your own thoughts. Hammers, drills, the foreman shouting, metal against metal. In the evening, it all goes quiet. And then the ship doesn't seem bigger, on the contrary, emptier. I stood in a corridor where one day passengers will walk, and I remembered your letter. Without luggage, without music, without voices. You put that very well. I looked at the doorways, and for the first time I started imagining not the ship, but the people. Here, some man will be looking for his cabin and pretending he hasn't got lost. There, a child will run down the corridor with his mother shouting after him. Someone will lose money at cards. Someone will drink too much champagne. Someone will stand on deck at night and stare at the water. Maybe two people will meet each other for the first time there. Maybe someone will say goodbye forever. Funny thing. We argue here over rivets, crooked panels, and a few inches of wood, and for someone, those few inches will one day become the setting for the most important minute of their life. I never used to think like that. So you've ruined my work, Miss Whitmore. Now I see people everywhere who aren't there yet. By the way, you wrote that I ought to be angry about building a ship for journeys I'll never take myself. I'm not angry, at least not about that. My father worked at the shipyard all his life. He could look at a ship's hull and roughly tell you how it would behave in the water. When I was a child, I thought that was some kind of magic. When I was 12, he once took me down to the river and pointed at a ship we could barely see in the fog. He said, "See that? There's a piece of metal in there that I put in." I laughed because the whole ship was enormous, and he was talking about some piece of metal you couldn't even make out. He took offense. Only now do I understand why. A person must want very badly to leave behind at least something that will outlive them. My father died 4 years ago, and the ship he was talking about back then is still sailing. Maybe that's why I like this work. There aren't many things in the world you can touch with your hands and know for certain after you they'll remain. Titanic is the biggest ship ever built. People here talk about it as if it's already become immortal. The foremen are proud of it, the owners are proud of it, the newspapers are proud of it, though newspapers do love to take pride in other people's work. And I sometimes think the biggest things have one bad habit. They make people believe that size makes them invulnerable. I don't know why I wrote that. I suppose it's just one of those days. One more thing. You wrote about the people in your shop. Since then, I've been watching the men at the yard. And you were right. Almost every one of us lives another life somewhere else. Patrick, who can curse a man so hard he blushes even on his back, buys flowers for his wife every Sunday. Old McKenna tells everyone that books are a waste of time, but I've seen him twice reading the newspaper from the back because that's where they print stories about travelers. And James, who gave me your Ivanhoe, today asked for the book back. I said I'd lost it. That was a lie. The book is by my bedside, and I'm not giving it back. Not because it's a good book, just that now it's somehow no longer his. A different story started inside it, and I'm curious for now how it ends.
Thomas, today I lied to my mother for the first time because of you. Don't worry, it was a small crime. She saw your letter by my plate at breakfast and asked who was writing to me from Ireland. I said, "A man who builds ships." My mother stopped pouring tea. Literally stopped. Then she looked at me as if I'd just announced I was going to marry you, move to Belfast, and give birth to 6 children right there on the shipyard. So I added, "He's old." Forgive me, you're now about 60. At least my mother picked up the teapot again. I read your letter the same evening it came. Then I hid it in a drawer. Then I took it out before bed. Then I hid it again. The next morning I decided that was a little ridiculous, so I read it once more. Especially the part about your father. I don't know if I ought to write this, but I liked that you didn't try to make him a great man after his death. You just wrote about a piece of metal. That's why I believed it. I think we often start lying about the dead with the best intentions. We make them kinder, wiser, braver than they were, as if death automatically fixes a person's character. And your father simply took offense at a 12-year-old boy who laughed at the wrong moment. For some reason, that struck me as very alive. My father also wants to leave something big behind, only he doesn't build ships, he builds our family as if it were a business. He has a plan. My mother is to be a respectable wife, my sister a well-bred girl, me to marry well, and he to die very old one day, leaving us enough money that everyone will say what a provident man he was. Yesterday, that plan changed a little. At dinner, my father announced that next spring he intends to go to Europe. In London, he's been offered a meeting with people who supply fabrics to several large trading houses. He's been talking about it for months, but until now, I thought he'd go alone. Turns out, no. My mother wants to go with him, and if my mother goes, my sister and I go too. You're probably smiling now, the woman who wrote to you about the ocean as if it were some philosophical riddle might actually cross it herself. My first thought was London. My second was quite different. I got out a map. Belfast turned out to be a great deal closer to London than Boston. I stared at that map longer than I should have. Then I folded it and put it away. Don't read too much into that, Mr. O'Reilly. We've only known each other through a few sheets of paper. Besides, you're now a 60-year-old shipbuilder. But something worse happened today. A man came into the shop and asked for a book for a journey across the Atlantic. I asked where he was headed. He said, to England, and I thought of you. Not of Belfast, not of Titanic, of you. That annoyed me. A person shouldn't take up residence in someone else's thoughts so quickly, especially when that person lives 3,000 miles away and doesn't even know what you look like. So I decided to run an experiment. On my way home today, I tried not to think about your letter. I walked 3 blocks. On the 4th, I saw the word ship in a newspaper. The experiment failed. And one more thing. You wrote that Titanic makes people feel as if size makes it invulnerable. I showed that sentence to my father. Not the whole letter. I just copied that line onto a separate piece of paper. He laughed. He said people are always afraid of new things until someone proves there's nothing to fear. Then he added that once that ship starts sailing the Atlantic, he'd like to go on it at least once. I said nothing. Strange thing, Thomas. A few weeks ago, the word Titanic was just a name in a newspaper. Now there's a man working there whose letters I hide from my mother. The world really is getting smaller. I'm afraid this time my father was right.
Eleanor,
I'm 26. I thought it necessary to start with that before your mother forms the final impression that her daughter is secretly corresponding with an old Irishman who coughs by the fireplace and tells stories about the good old days. I will not forgive you for 60 years, at least not until your next letter. I opened your envelope right at the shipyard. That was a mistake. James noticed the American stamp and has been convinced ever since that I've inherited money from a distant relative. I didn't disappoint him. He now treats me with considerably more politeness. If this keeps up, in a few months your letters will have made me the richest man in Belfast who still goes to work with a hole in his left shoe. Now seriously, you're going to Europe? I read that sentence, then again, then I finished the letter. Then I went back to it a third time, as if London might have disappeared somewhere between the first and third reading. It hadn't. Neither had Belfast. I don't even know what unsettled me so much. Until now, there was an ocean between us, a very convenient thing when you think about it. 3,000 miles of water allow a person to write things they would never say sitting across a table from someone. Paper doesn't look back at you, doesn't fall silent at an awkward moment, doesn't notice you said something foolish, and most importantly, weeks pass between what's written and what's read. In that time, you can convince yourself that the letter was written by some other version of you. And now you've suddenly taken out a map, and the distance has stopped being measured by ocean. Now it's trains. That's considerably more dangerous. I took out a map too. That was even stupider. One of the lads saw me studying England and asked if I was running from debt. I said I was thinking about London. He said that was worse. Maybe he's right. On Titanic, things have started appearing that make the ship look less like a machine and more like a place someone might actually arrive at with a suitcase. Wood, lamps, doors, stairs. No carpets yet, but you can already imagine where they'll be. Yesterday, I was working near one of the grand staircases. A man stood there with blueprints, arguing over a few inches of decoration as if the fate of the British Empire depended on them. And I suddenly thought of your bookshop, of men who buy adventure, of women who buy novels, of old men who buy travel. And then I thought that we're building a place where all of them will be under one roof for a few days. The rich upstairs, the poor below, people going to America to start a life, people going home, people running away, people who think they're just traveling. None of them yet knows who they'll stand next to on deck. It's a bit like your note in Ivanhoe. You send something out into the world and you lose the right to decide where it ends up. By the way, I still have the book, and I did something with it that a real book lover would probably hit me for. On page 123, where your note was, I made a small pencil mark. I don't know why. Maybe so that one day I can open it and make sure it all really started there. But the strangest thing didn't happen at the yard. The night before last, I stopped by my mother's. She lives not far from me and believes that a man without a wife is slowly starving to death, even if he shows up at her place 3 times a week for dinner. I carelessly mentioned Boston, just the word. My mother stopped cutting bread. Clearly, this is an international female reaction. I immediately remembered your mother and her teapot. She asked who I knew in Boston. I said no one. Then I thought and added almost no one. That was mistake number 2. By the end of dinner, she already knew that you were 23, that you worked among books, and that your father traded in fabrics. I don't remember telling her that last part. Mothers have some way of extracting information from people that ought to be banned by international treaty. As I was leaving, she said, "Thomas, just don't imagine her better than she is just because you've never seen her." I got angry. Not at her, at the fact that she was right. We really don't know each other. I don't know what your laugh sounds like. I don't know if you speak quickly. I don't know if you scrunch up your nose when you're angry. You don't know that I limped for the first 5 minutes after a long shift. That I have a scar above my right eyebrow because at 9 I decided I could jump over a stone fence. I couldn't. We only know about each other what fit into envelopes. And still, yesterday something happened that I can't properly explain. I was working inside the ship when one of the foremen said that after completion, Titanic would go to Southampton and from there across the Atlantic to New York. I knew that before. Everyone knows it. But this time I heard the word America, and I didn't think of New York. I thought of a small bookshop in Boston, of a woman I'd never seen. And suddenly the biggest ship in the world didn't seem quite so big. Eleanor, I don't know if your family will really come in the spring. I don't know if circumstances will change. I don't even know if we'll still be writing to each other by then. So I don't want to make a promise out of this. Promises between people who have never stood in the same room sound a little ridiculous. But I didn't throw away the map. It's folded inside Ivanhoe on page 123.
Thomas, I meant to write you 4 days ago. I didn't. Then yesterday, I sat down at my desk, put paper in front of me, and sat there for almost an hour. The page stayed blank. It's strange because until now, the hardest part of our letters was waiting for a reply. Now something else has become more difficult, deciding what I'm allowed to tell you. Last week, my sister found your letter. Not on purpose, at least that's what she claims. I'd left it in a book by my bed, she took the book, the envelope fell out, and then, according to her, it would have been unnatural not to look where it came from. My sister's name is Rose. She's 17 and has a remarkable talent for doing something absolutely forbidden and then explaining it so that I end up feeling guilty. She only read a few lines, so she said, after which she asked, "Is he handsome?" I said, I didn't know. She asked, "Then why are you writing to him?" I said that people can sometimes be interesting without a face. She looked at me with such pity, as if in that moment she understood that her older sister was hopelessly ruined by books. Then she asked if I'd fallen in love with you. I laughed, very loudly, too loudly, so loudly that she stopped laughing too, and that was the worst part. Because until that moment, I hadn't thought about it in that word at all. I like your letters. I wait for them. I recognize your handwriting on the envelope before I even read the name. And obviously, I already know that you have a scar above your eyebrow and couldn't jump over fences in the best years of your athletic career. But all of that seemed to me like something separate from the stories sold in our shop under the word romance. In novels, everything is very convenient. A man walks into a room, a woman sees him, the author writes that her heart stopped, 300 pages later, they're married. In our case, you walked into my life by post, and I still don't know what to do with that. So I decided to do something practical. Today, after work, I stopped by a photographer's. Don't worry, I wasn't going to send you a portrait, at least not at first. In the window were photographs of people. Weddings, children, soldiers, families, a man with a dog who, judging by his face, loved the dog considerably more than he loved the photographer. I stood in front of the window and suddenly thought, if we ever meet, the first thing that will disappear between us is the ability to imagine each other. You'll stop being a voice on paper. I'll stop being the woman you've assembled from sentences. This will sound ridiculous, but it frightened me. What if the real person turns out to be worse than the one we both invented? What if you see me and think, this is what I spent all those stamps on? I even laughed right there in the middle of the street. A woman crossed to the other side, probably decided I was insane. Maybe she was right. But then something happened that finally made me sit down to write. Yesterday, my father received a letter from London. The trip is happening. It's no longer talk. He needs to be there at the end of March. My mother started making a list of things we need to buy for Europe, as if Europe has banned the sale of gloves. Rose wants to see Paris, my father wants to close a deal, my mother wants to come home with enough stories to torment the neighbors for the next 10 years. And I sat at the table thinking of only one thing: Belfast. Not London, not Paris, Belfast. I even got angry at myself, because this is starting to be unfair. You write to me about real things, about your father, about work, about how your legs hurt after a shift, and I still behave as if our meeting is some amusing possibility I can hide inside a joke. So, without joking, if we really are in Europe in the spring, I want to see you. I wrote that, and I didn't cross it out. That's enough. But there's something else. Tonight, at dinner, my father was talking about returning to America, An acquaintance of his said that next spring, White Star Line is launching a new great liner. My mother immediately said she would never sail on a ship during its maiden voyage. My father laughed. And then he named it Titanic. I dropped my fork, literally, just let it fall out of my hand. Everyone looked at me. I said it was slippery. I don't know why I lied. Maybe because I couldn't explain to them that for me, it's no longer a ship's name. It's the place where you work, the place where you stood in the evening and imagined people who weren't there yet, the place I know more about than a woman who's never even seen its hull ought to know. My father said that if the dates work out, it would be interesting to return on her. The biggest ship in the world, new, luxurious, safer than anything that's ever sailed the Atlantic. He talked, and I somehow remembered one sentence from your letter, about big things that make people believe they're invulnerable. I said nothing. I just picked up my fork. Thomas, I have a map now, too. I made a small dot near Belfast. I don't know if that was foolish, but now between your dot and mine is an ocean, and for the first time it doesn't seem quite so big. I did have the photograph taken after all. It's lying in front of me as I write this, but I'm not putting it in this envelope. Not yet.
Eleanor, I read your letter at night. Not because it arrived late, because I deliberately didn't open it until evening. I carried the envelope in my inside jacket pocket all day. I knew it was there, and that was worse than not knowing. At dinner, James asked why I kept touching my chest. He said that after 26 it would be late to start worrying. So I waited until night, made tea, sat by the window, read it, and then stared at the last line for about 10 minutes, the one where the photograph isn't in the envelope. Eleanor, that was cruelty. Very well planned. Now I know that somewhere in Boston there's a portrait of you. I know it lay in front of you while you wrote, and I have no idea what you look like. That's almost worse than not knowing about the photograph at all. Almost. But I won't ask for it. Not yet. You wrote that you're afraid of the moment when we stop being people from letters and become ordinary people in the same room. I am too, and that's exactly why I want it to happen. Today I allowed myself for the first time to imagine our meeting, not as a joke, not as a map, not as maybe in the spring, a real one. I tried to think of what I'd say to you. It turned out nothing. In letters I seem considerably smarter. In life I'll most likely stand before you like an idiot and say something about the weather. So I have a request. If it happens, and the first thing I say after all these letters is, "It's chilly in London today," pretend you're not disappointed. Now I need to tell you something about the ship. I don't know if it's interesting to anyone outside the yard. It is to me, maybe because I see it every day. Titanic has started to smell. Strange sentence, I know. Before it smelled of metal, oil, wood dust, and the sweat of a few thousand men. Now everything's changing. Varnish appears, paint, new wood, fabric, glue. One day I was passing through a first-class section and smelled fresh timber, and I suddenly realized that the ship almost no longer belongs to us. A little longer and we'll leave. Others will come. Stewards, cooks, officers, passengers. For years we leave our handprints on it, and then everything will be washed off. Someone will put on a white jacket and serve dinner right where we argued over a hammer today. I don't like that for some reason. I don't know if a carpenter misses a table when he sells it. Probably not. But a ship is different. It's too big not to start thinking it's a little bit yours. Last week we were allowed to walk along part of the deck after the shift. It was cold. The wind came off the water. Belfast below was already lighting its lamps. I stood there and tried to imagine the Atlantic. I couldn't. Then I imagined Boston. I couldn't either. Then I imagined you with that photograph in your hands. For some reason, that was very easy. I thought of another strange thing. You might one day step onto the deck I'm walking on now in work boots. You'll touch a railing that one of our lads is polishing right now. Maybe you'll sit at a table that's still covered in cloth today.
And you won't know what I did on this ship. I won't know where you are either. Thousands of people, hundreds of doors, miles of corridors. But I like to think that somewhere there'll be at least one small piece of my work that you'll walk past. That would be enough. Though I have to say one thing. When you wrote that your father is considering returning on Titanic, I didn't like it, and I can't explain why without sounding like a fool. I work on this ship. I know the people building it. I see how many inspections are done here. I see the foreman arguing over the tiniest inaccuracy. I have no reason to fear this vessel. None. But a few weeks ago, something happened. Nothing serious. One metal plate was fixed wrong and had to be taken off and put back on. That happens all the time. No one would even remember. But one old worker, Murphy, watched us redo it and said, "The most dangerous thing isn't when people know they made a mistake. The most dangerous thing is when they're certain it's impossible to make one." Everyone laughed at him. He likes to talk as if every rivet contains a moral lesson. I laughed too. And now for some reason I remember his words. Maybe because your father called the ship safer than anything before. Maybe because everyone around has started talking about it exactly like that. The biggest, the best, the most modern. I haven't heard just one word yet. Ordinary. And a ship, no matter what the newspapers call it, is still a ship. Steel is still steel. The sea is still the sea. Don't tell your father that. He'll decide that a man building the ship is trying to talk him out of a ticket. I'm not. Maybe the opposite. If your family really does return on Titanic, then this ship will for the first time carry someone I know. And that one thought has made all our work different to me. By the way, I had a photograph taken too. Not today, 2 days ago. It was humiliating. The photographer ordered me not to move and to look slightly to the left, as if something incredibly interesting was happening there. In the picture, I look as if I've just been accused of a crime I didn't commit. So I'm not sending you the photograph either. Not yet. So now we're even. Your portrait is in Boston, mine is in Belfast, and the Atlantic between them. Let it stay that way for now. But in the spring, if you really are in London, I'll come. Not as a man from a letter, not as a man from a photograph, just as Thomas. And then we'll find out whether all these envelopes were the beginning of something real, or the longest way in the world to meet someone who annoys you.
Thomas, today I finally put the photograph in an envelope. Then I took it out, put it in a second time, and took it out again. It's lying to my right now, face down on the table, as if it's offended. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Maybe because these last few months, I've been catching myself more and more often telling you things I don't tell people who sit at the same table with me, and that's a little frightening. Something happened at dinner yesterday. My father came home later than usual. He put his hat down in the hallway, sat at the table, and took a folded paper from his inside pocket. He was in excellent spirits. My mother immediately suspected an expense. She always suspects an expense when my father is happy. But this time, it wasn't about money, at least not only about money. He said our spring trip was finally settled. We would leave for England at the end of March, spend a few weeks there and in France, and then come home. Rose asked which ship. My father smiled. I already knew the answer. I don't know how. Maybe because life has become too strange lately to choose the ordinary option. He said, Titanic. My mother immediately said she wasn't going to cross the ocean on a ship that hadn't even been given a chance to prove it could sail. My father laughed. He said that was exactly why he wanted to go on it. The maiden voyage, the biggest ship in the world, a historic event. He'd already instructed an agent to arrange passage for the return crossing. I was quiet the whole time. Then I asked only one thing. When? My father gave the date, April 10th. I said nothing. I just looked at him. And do you know what's strange? A few months ago, that would have been the most interesting part of the news for me. Sailing on the biggest ship in the world on its first voyage? I'd probably have spent the whole evening asking my father about cabins, decks, restaurants, how many days the crossing takes. But I was thinking of something else entirely. of a man who knows this ship without passengers, of a man who saw its corridors before dresses, suitcases, children's voices, and music appeared there, of a man who once wrote to me, "Steel is still steel, the sea is still the sea." Thomas, I didn't tell my father that sentence, otherwise he'd have decided you were trying to frighten me, but you didn't frighten me. Worse, you made me look at the ship differently. For everyone around, Titanic is the future. For the newspapers, a sensation. For my father, an adventure he'll tell stories about at dinner for years. For Rose, a chance to walk the deck in a new dress and imagine everyone is looking at her. And for me, I don't even know what it's become for me. Maybe the biggest coincidence in my life. You found my note by chance. On the ship you're building, my family happens to return home, and between those two chances, something happened that neither of us planned. There's expectation now, of your letters, of your handwriting, of your silly stories about James, of your sentences that sometimes make me walk around the room for an hour arguing with a person who isn't here. And of our meeting. Yes, I wrote that, this time without maybe. I want to see you. But I don't want to imagine where anymore. I don't want to draw routes in pencil and turn us into two dots that absolutely have to meet on a map at a certain place. There are still a few months until spring. The world can change. Our plans can change. We ourselves can change. So let's leave at least one thing undecided. I like not knowing where exactly I'll first hear your voice. The only thing I know for certain now, in the spring, I'll be on your side of the Atlantic. And then, on April 10th, I'll board the ship you see before you every day now. You once wrote that you like to think that somewhere on it, there'll remain a small piece of your work that I'll walk past. I thought about that today, and I came up with something. Not a cabin, not a door, not a table. Choose any place on Titanic. One that means nothing to anyone else. A corner of the deck, a railing, a step, a window. Something that hundreds of people will pass and none will even pause at. Don't tell me where it is. Just one day, when you're there alone, touch it with your hand, for 1 second, and think, Eleanor will stand here one day. Don't tell me where, not even in your next letter, especially in your next letter. When I'm on the ship, I won't look for that place. I'll just know that somewhere it exists. I think that's even better. We try to explain too many things with words anyway. And one more thing. Remember the photograph I didn't put in the last envelope? This time it's staying in Boston too, but for a different reason. Before, I was afraid you'd see me and the woman in the photograph would turn out to be worse than the Eleanor you'd imagined. Now I understand something. I don't want your mailbox to be the first to see me. I want to see your face the second it happens, without a photograph, without warning, without the chance to prepare the right reaction. That's a little unfair, I know, but after your criminal portrait, we're even. My father left the travel papers on the table. Before sitting down to write to you, I went over and looked at them again. There were a lot of words, dates, city names, the company's name, numbers, and in the center, one word that until recently had meant nothing to me. Titanic. I ran my finger over the name, and I suddenly thought about that note in Ivanhoe. 2 years ago, I wrote, I like to think that things sometimes find people better than people find each other. Back then, it was just a pretty thought from a 21-year-old girl. Now, it doesn't seem pretty to me anymore. It seems dangerous. Because some things really do find people, and then take them further, and we don't always know where. Until spring, Thomas, take care of Ivanhoe. Take care of yourself. Finish that ship properly. In the spring, I'll be trusting it with my life.